Bachu Kormukar, please switch your video button off.
Am I audible, sir?
You are.
Good morning, one and all. I am Udrima Ghosh of Undergraduate Honours Second Semester on behalf of the Postgraduate Department of English, Bankura Christian College. Welcome you all to the 14th day of its International Web Lecture Series hosted by the Department of English, Bankura Christian College. It is a moment of great honor for me to extend a cordial welcome to the dignitaries, faculty members, research scholars, students, and to one and everyone who have gathered on this virtual platform, either through Google Meet Forum or over YouTube Live. We are privileged to have among us today two eminent personalities, Professor Amrit Sensor, Professor, Department of English, Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, and Dr. Vendrina Ghosh Ma'am, Associate Professor, Department of English, Diamond Harbour, Women's University. We are glad to offer them the most gracious welcome notes. Before I request Professor Amrit Sensor to go ahead with his deliberation in the first session, may I request Dr. Narugopal Mukherjee sir, Reader, Department of English, Bankura Christian College, to formally introduce Professor Amrit Sensor. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madhurima. Thank you so much for giving me this privilege, this honor to introduce a great resource person of Amrit Sen's caliber. Professor Amrit Sen is presently in the Department of English at Vishwabharati Shantiniketan. Interested in 18th century studies, travel writing, Tagore studies, and the history of science, he has won the Outstanding Research Award for his doctoral dissertation, The Narcissistic Mode, Metafiction as a Strategy in Moll Flanders, Tom Jones, and Kristen Sandy, published in 2007. Some of his publications and edited volumes include Gitanjali, the centenary edition, Rabindranath Tagore, the unsung hero, Rabindranath Tagore and his circle, Sharing the Dream, the remarkable women of Shantiniketan, Confluence of Minds, the Rabindranath Tagore and Patrick Geddes' Reader on Education and the Environment, co-edited with Taupati Mukhopadhyay and Basavi Fraser, published from Scotland. The Scottish Enlightenment and the Bengal Renaissance, The Continuum of Ideas, again co-edited with Taupati Mukhopadhyay and Basavi Fraser, published from Scotland. And also Shantiniketan for Visitors, The Bengali Chemist Acharya Prafulla Chandra Rai and Post-Coloniality. Again, Bosundhara, Rabindranath Tagore and the Environment, published from Vishwabharati. He is joint coordinator of the UGC UG&PG project on the Scotland-India Continuum, Tagore and his Circle, and the deputy coordinator of the UGC SAP project on Rabindranath Tagore, the East-West Confluence at the Department of English. Apart from his academic engagements, he has also translated and performed in Tagore's dance dramas in national and international programs. He is presently also the joint editor of the Vishwabharati Quarterly. Among his major awards, he has won the Outstanding Thesis Award by the Government of India, the Research Award by the UGC, the Oxford 18th Century Bursary, and a host of academic recognitions. He has traveled extensively as project coordinator for the UG&PG Award to Edinburgh, Scotland as invited speaker, and to the University of Oxford and Twickenham. Also, Tongji University, Shanghai, China, as he has delivered the Tagore Memorial Lecture at the Rabindranath Tagore Center under the Mahatma Gandhi Institute at Mauritius. Professor Amrit Sen is also presently officiating as the Director of Granthon Vibhag, the publication wing of Vishwabharati, and he has been holding this post since July 2018. So now I request Professor Sen to grace the occasion with his deliberation.
Thank you, Narugopalda. Let me first share my screen and then make some initial comments. Can you see my screen?
It's visible, sir.
It's visible.
Could you make it full screen, sir?
Right. Just a moment. Right. Is it visible full screen now?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Right. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for those kind words to Narugopalda and Oyon, old friends. Well, my association with Bankura Christian College has been a long one. And I have been there on various programs and always enjoyed the cordiality of colleagues and friends there. So it's great to be back, although under different circumstances. Is there anybody's microphone on?
Rimpa Das, please mute your microphone.
Okay.
Rimpa Das.
So, right. Thank you. Am I audible?
You are, sir. You are.
Yeah. Fine. Thank you. Thank you, Owen. So, it's good to be back among friends, and I can see a lot of students, colleagues, peers who are listening in. This is actually a follow-up on a lecture delivered on Book 1 of Gulliver's Travels earlier, and it takes up Book 4 of Gulliver's Travels, the Voyage to Yahoos and Homonyms. And I've titled it Of Soft and Hard Schools, Reading Gulliver's Travels, Book 4. Now, I will add that this does not bring any very substantial new research into my deliberations. It's rather something which I want students to listen in and understand the nuances and the critical trajectories that Book 4 of Gulliver's Travels has actually taken, in many ways being the culmination and the climax of the text. Right. These are the older questions that I asked for that session. I'll keep them for this session because they are my gateways. The first is the genre of Gulliver's Travels. You need to understand this very carefully. Secondly, Swift's ingenuity in narrative. There's something which is taking on from a modest proposal. The role of specific images in Gulliver's Travels, which become crucial in linking up the text from Book 1 to 4, apart from the presence of Lemuel Gulliver. The most important question of this book, really, what is the role of Gulliver, the narrator? And let me categorically make this distinction between Gulliver, the narrator, and Swift, the author. This is going to be one of the most important distinctions of the text. And then again, this question, which is not asked generally, but I keep on probing, what is absent in Gulliver's Travels? I am going to talk about an absent presence in Gulliver's Travels, and therefore the fourth book becomes the gateway to that. Now, the operative quotation, which I use here, and that is the first, you can see that first quotation, where Swift talks about vexing the world rather than to divert it. So Gulliver's Travels is a deadly serious work of fiction, not something which you read just to imaginatively satisfy yourself. But more importantly, Swift wrote to Pope that he has this material towards a treatise proving the falsity of that definition, animal rationale, a rational animal, and to show that it would only be rationis capax, animal capable of reasoning. He says, upon this great foundation of misanthropy, the whole building of my travels is erected. Now, students of mine who are attending this will remember how I hammer this quotation in almost in every class because this is the operative quotation here. Now, there are three terms which are going to be used here. Animal rationale is the perfectly rational animal, which according to Aristotle, man is. That is his distinction from his rational soul from the vegetative and the animal soul. Then there's this question of whether man is just an animal, omni-animal, right? Object of pure desire and passions and the senses. And somewhere in between, Swift suggests that there is the rationis capax, an organism which has the potential of reason, but perennially lacks it. To a pyramid of that structure, then you will understand where Swift is coming from. But then there is, of course, Lemuel Gulliver at the end of Gulliver's Travels, when Gulliver says, "When I behold a lump of deformity and diseases both in body and mind smitten with pride, it immediately breaks all the measures of my patience." Such an animal and such a vice could tally together. So at the end of the text, you find Lemuel Gulliver solipsistically isolated, staying with the horses, shunning his family, and dismissing man as a lump of deformity. So, quite obviously, Gulliver has withdrawn to the position that man is omni-animal, just an animal, and has no semblance of reason. Now, you will remember the genres, of course, the fantasy and fantastic voyages, travel writing. In this case, my argument is it is a journey into philosophy. Utopias and dystopias, all the books are various stages of utopia and dystopia. Satire, which is probably the most important operative genre here. And very importantly, I'm going to argue book 4 takes up something called Benippian satire, which I'll define in a minute, and the story of Contemptus Mundi, or the criticism of man. So these are the genres. You have to understand that Swift's text is not a simple one. It's playing around with a lot of forms, and these forms are continuously jostling with each other for generic space and overlapping with each other. Now, the Menippean satire, and this is something which I would like to just linger on for a moment, is a satire that does not treat institutions or individuals in the way that Horatian or Juvenalian satires do. More akin towards Juvenalian satire, Benippian satire takes up intellectual ideas and therefore blends the serious and the comic, the high and the low, and is skeptical of any established authority. So, you see, Menippean satire is a satire against a point of view. And this was studied at length by Northrop Frye, explains that it deals less with people, thus more with mental attitudes, confession in its ability to handle abstract ideas and theories, and differs from the novel in its characterization, which is stylized rather than naturalistic. So Menippean satire does not want characters who are real. Menippean satires use characters who are personas, through whom particular philosophical attitudes may be critiqued. And therefore, scandal scenes, eccentric behavior, inappropriate speeches, and there are travels to fantastic lands, extraordinary life situations. So you see, we do not expect realism from Menippean satire. Menippean satire actually thrives on the fantastic. And then William Empson talks about elements of social utopia, but Menippean satire is not, just abstract. It is also, as Bakhtin will point out in the next discussion on Menippean satire, that Menippean satire is concerned with current and topical issues. So whenever there's a seismic shift, there's a great shift towards a new paradigm of ideas, it is then that you see Menippean satires flourish. For example, the Renaissance, For example, the Enlightenment, and of course, later on more towards the postmodern, right? So whenever there's a major shift in philosophy, you look at a Menippean satire. You have to understand this, and it is this perspective which will sort of make you appreciate the complexity of Gulliver's Travels. Therefore, you see, this is my favorite image, the image of Edward's spectacles. And you see, Menippean satire therefore asks you to wear glasses through which, your vision is altered, right? So how do you see? How do you perceive? Perception, see, are very important metaphors of Gulliver's Travels. How does one look at the idea of reason? How does one look at the idea of the human body? These are fundamental questions that Swift is asking. I have talked about the Enlightenment earlier, so I'll not linger here. That the Enlightenment believed in the primacy of reason, the Cartesian idea of the separation of the mind and the body, and the priority of the mind, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. The movement from religion to secularism, of course, it's a new paganism as Peter Gay once famously defined it. The foregrounding of the human mind, I've talked about this. The belief in secular learning leading to all knowledge, of course, the operative philosopher being John Locke. The claim of travel and mapping the universe, which is in the background of Gulliver's Travels, and also science as the new religion, which really becomes the focal point of critique in Book 3. Now, Swift's positionality needs to be appreciated before you really launch into Gulliver's Travels. And being part of the Catholic clergy and the Dean of St. Patrick's, Swift was steeped in a religious skepticism against the claims of the Enlightenment and saw pride, the pride in human reason, and that is where the satire against yahoos largely comes from, as a cardinal sin. There's also a serious element of misogyny in Swift, which we will not talk about here. And Swift was frequently alleged to be misanthropic and even mad. It is true that in the latter part of his life, Dean Swift had actually lost his mind. So there is a degree of bitterness, there's a degree of insanity, there's a degree of isolation, which binds, in a way, Swift and Gulliver. Now let me come to this question of what is the Menippean part of the satire, and what is this clash of different points of view. And therefore, the entire question is about the human state, the state of nature and the state of government. These are two very important questions which were being asked by the Enlightenment. What is man's state like? And what is the nature of government going to be? Now, you will find, those of you who have political science as a subject, that this is the time when politics becomes a science. Well, it was there, treated very seriously during Aristotle and the Romans, but please remember that this is the point where modern political science and the system of government actually evolves. Therefore, state of nature, nature of the state, right? These are crucial issues. And the first philosopher here is Thomas Hobbes, whose text, interestingly, this is a picture which I'm going to come back to after I've discussed Hobbes. His text was titled Leviathan, published 1651. So you see, around this period, our modernity is as it were being crystallized. Hobbes, 1651, Descartes, 1670, Locke, 1690, all the major philosophers that you could talk about. So what does Hobbes say about our state of nature? He says that all men are more or less equal. So Oyon and I, Naruda and I, all are more or less equal in intelligence and strength, right? And therefore, every man is naturally vulnerable to one another. So, in a battle, more or less all of us are equal. Now, all of us want what? All of us want competition. There are scant resources. So we are competing for those resources, right? All of us do not want the other to succeed, and all of us want glory, right? Therefore, we are engaged in this huge competitive bid of life. Resources are limited, our wants are unlimited, every man is demanding glory. Therefore, what does Hobbes suggest? Hobbes suggests that the state of nature is a war of everyone against everyone. So all of us are continuously in a state of battle with one another. Not a very pleasant philosopher, Hobbes was. And therefore, since everyone is at one war with another, so if Oyon sort of gets a good piece of cake, I'm going to take it away. And if Naruda gets a good piece of, other food or a good piece of jewelry, I'm going to snatch it away. A state of nature is a state of war, is a state of fear and poverty, for there is no leisure for industry, culture of the earth, navigation, nor commerce. So why will you actually bring in something new? Why will you generate a produce when somebody else can snatch it away? So it is a state of barrenness, it's a state of misery, it's a state of war. And in this state, that is Hobbes's great quote, which my students know I'm very fond of repeating. Life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Those are Hobbes's exact words. Remember that. Right. So in this state of war and in this state of nature, there's no concept of morality or there's no concept of social decorum. Everything is just. And that's, the source of that quotation, everything is fair in love and war, right? Where there's no common power, no police force, no law courts, there's no law, no injustice. And force and fraud in war are two cardinal virtues. So you have to win, you have to take it away. And man is governed by his passions. Passions are neither good nor evil, they are just facts. This is the state of the omni-animal, right? Man is just a beast, and that too solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Imagine all of us are continuously fighting with each other. Therefore, what does Hobbes propose? Hobbes proposes that how do we escape from the state? We escape from the state by our fear of death. Nobody wants to die, and all of us want to be comfortable. So the first thing we need is peace in society. How does one give peace? One gets peace by choosing a sovereign. And how does the sovereign, get his power? The sovereign gets power because we transfer our power to him. We are the ones who are transferring our power to him, right? So who is this, and why do we transfer power? Because he will bring peace, he will bring a civil society. And this sovereign must be self-perpetuating, undivided, and ultimately absolute. He must be more powerful than the rest of us combined. And therefore the sovereign is created by, not a party to the compact. Once you have transferred your rights, you cannot take them back. He therefore cannot be got rid of, because he is in the breach of the compact. If he could be, his power would not, after all, be sovereign. So Hobbes is the first real philosopher who's looking at the transfer of rights, and is looking at the concept of a fascist state. Now take a look at this picture once again. This is the sovereign, and can you see that the sovereign's body is composed of all of us? It's composed of people. It's a composite, of all the people taken together. And you can see how he towers over the entire Commonwealth. That is Hobbes. State of nature, nasty, solitary, poor, brutish, short. Therefore, there's no reason. Now, the obverse is provided by Locke. And Locke talks about human nature and the nature of property in two treatises of government. This was also a text which was published in 1690, although Hobbes was talking about this from 1680, Locke was talking about this from 1683 onwards. He talks about the state of nature where men mostly keep their promises, honored their obligations, mostly peaceful, good, and pleasant. So he says, we are all rational, we are all essentially good, we keep our promises, so the state of nature has no conflict. Humans know what is right and wrong and are capable of knowing what is lawful and unlawful well enough to resolve conflicts. How do we know? Because we are rational. Peace is the norm. For Hobbes, war is the norm. We can and should live together in peace by refraining from molesting each other's property and persons, and we give our rights. We also transfer our rights to the sovereign, but we retain the right to life and liberty and gain the right to just, impartial protection of our property. Please remember that Locke is also the great philosopher of the free market. The right to property is inalienable, right? Okay. Therefore, what kind of a government does Locke want? He says that the ruler will rule only by our consent. We will elect him. We will give him rights. But if he violates the conditions of providing us security or getting absolute power, then we will throw him out, right? Therefore, if he puts himself in a state of war with his subjects, we have the right and duty to kill such rulers. We will just replace him. So Locke is also looking at a democratic, secular form of government. And he's looking at civil society, which is preceding the state. So society precedes the state rather than state preceding the society, as Hobbes suggests. Men have their rights, and the only important role of the state is to ensure that justice is done. So two diametrically different views of the state of nature and the state of government as put forward by Locke. Sorry, I somewhere had a picture of Locke. Yes, there he is, Locke with his two treatises of government, 1690. Now, if you take a look, then the yahoos and homonyms are actually, visualizations of Hobbes and Locke. Take a look at the yahoos. This is taken from the text itself. Shape is singular and deformed. It talks about beards like goats, 4 parts of their leg and feet, talks about their buttocks, anus, and then says, upon the whole, I never beheld in all my travels so disagreeable an animal, or one against which I naturally conceived so strong an antipathy. So miserable creatures the yahoos are, always fighting amongst themselves. And what are their characteristics? What do they do? Beastly in appearance. It's a society which is perpetually in conflict. For example, the homonym master throws a piece of ass's flesh, and the yahoos all jump and fight amongst themselves. As the homonym points out, they will fight even if there are enough resources. Yahoo society is marked by sycophancy. The head yahoo, as it were, asks all the others to lick his posteriors. Greed, they have greed for these stones that they find and they hoard. And desire, they're all perpetually sort of engaging in sexual desire. Appetite, continuously marked by the desire for food, gluttony, and filth, also marked by the presence of feces, which they throw at their enemies. In fact, Gulliver himself becomes a victim for all the yahoos jump on a tree and defecate on him. Also, the yahoos are marked by the presence, some of the yahoos are marked by the presence of melancholia. So it's a society in conflict. It's a society where there's no discipline. It's a society where there is total anarchy. And therefore, it is a society which the homonyms must control with great violence. Now, let's take a look at the antithesis of the yahoos, the homonyms. Now, the grand maxim, and this is once again everything is taken from the text so that you can relate to it later on. The grand maxim is to cultivate reason and to be wholly governed by it. Friendship and benevolence are the two principal virtues. So once again, reason, friendship, benevolence. But the operative word, once again, is reason. So it's a Lockean society where there is benevolence, where there is mutual understanding, and it is universal to the whole race, mind you. It's not just one or two hominins. Decency and civility in the highest degrees. Courtship, love, presence, etc. have no place in their thoughts. Their society is marked by temperance, industry, exercise, and cleanliness. And of course, there is democracy. Every 4th year, there is a representative council of the whole nation. You see, if you go back to the Yahoos and if you come back to the homonyms, they are the representations of a Hobbesian vision of anarchy versus a Lockean vision of an utopia. Right? So that is where these questions of the soft and the hard schools come from. Now, the question is, where is Swift and where is Gulliver? Now, you see, we can see that we can have two visions here. One is that the Yahoos are the representations of man, and the homonyms are an utopia that the narrator looks at. Therefore, human society is nasty, brutish, and short. And that Swift is Gulliver. He is misanthropic, and he is categorizing human society as completely chaotic. Or else you can suggest that no, this is not true, that there is a distance between Swift and Gulliver, and that Swift is also critiquing Gulliver, that the humanists are not really the human idea, that Swift, in believing the humans completely, is actually being fallacious. I'm sorry, Gulliver, in believing the humanists, is being fallacious. You see, that's the fallacy which even I am committing within the lecture. You must never commit that. You must ponder as to whether there is a distance between Swift and Gulliver. Right? So how does one distinguish that? Then, through the meaning of the homonyms and the Yahoos, the purpose of Captain Pedro Mendes, who comes at the end of Gulliver's travels, offers Gulliver shelter in the ship, food, passage, and whom Gulliver cannot stand because he is a Yahoo. And the meaning of Gulliver's insanity at the voyage's close, where he takes up residence in the stable rather than accepting the love of his wife. Now, these two schools are called the hard and the soft school. By the way, am I audible?
You are perfectly audible, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you. These two schools are called the hard and the soft schools. The terms were used by James Clifford in a 1974 essay titled The Hard and the Soft Schools. This is one of the most important pieces of criticism of Gulliver's travels. What is the hard school? The hard school of thought operates under the same basic principles as the early critics who linked Gulliver and Swift, that Swift is Gulliver and that mankind is the Yahoo and therefore must be completely, utterly critiqued and shunned. In this school, the homonyms are Swift's ideal for mankind, and the despicable Yahoos should depress or even anger the reader. We are the Yahoos, we can aspire towards the homonyms, but we can never become the homonyms. Right. But it's very difficult to justify this because Swift was a far cleverer author. In letters to Bolingbroke and Pope, he explained that he had always rejected the definition of man as a rational animal, but he did not hate mankind. On the contrary, that he felt that holding men to unattainable ideas is the true misanthropy. Right? Therefore, we go back once again to this slide once again that I had talked about, and this is the operative once again slide, that proving the falsity of the definition of the animal rationale, but rationis capax. Man is not animal omni-animal. He has the capacity of reason, but he is not animal rational as yet. Please remember that when Kant will be talking about the Enlightenment, he will also be talking about the enlightenment as a process. He will say, we have not attained enlightenment, we are in the process of attaining enlightenment. But the Hart School doesn't see it that way. The Hart School says that man is only an animal, right? Substantiation, how does the Hart School substantiate this? This is the interaction between Swift and a female Yahoo. When Swift, I'm sorry, not Swift again, I'm very sorry, Gulliver and the female Yahoo. When Gulliver strips and he sort of is having a bath, then a female Yahoo notices him and, blinded by desire, jumps into the water and tries to copulate with him, and Gulliver feels nauseous at this, right? And there's, of course, the continuous rhetoric of Gulliver, who talks about how to seek their livelihood by begging, robbing, stealing, cheating, pimping, flattering, and so on. And therefore, there is a distinction between the society of Gulliver and the society of the homonyms. The homonyms, for example, have no concept of lies. Gulliver has to
Hello, sir.
solitary, nasty society. Ultimately, you see, Gulliver is also left absolutely solitary, right? So they say that Gulliver is right, man is a Yahoo. Right, let me come now to the soft school. The soft school rather suggests that Gulliver is the object of satire, not man. They say that Gulliver is insane at the end of the fourth voyage, and that Gulliver is so blinded by his fascination for reason that he does not see human goodness, alternative human possibilities, right? And Swift had actually used this device in a modest proposal earlier. So in this, there is a distance opened up between the narrator, Gulliver, and the author, Swift, that Gulliver himself becomes the target of Swift's irony. Gulliver is, and if you look at his status, is a surgeon, therefore a man of science. It's blinded very often. It's a narrator of Menippean satire, and finally isolated and in total misanthrope. Interestingly, if you carefully note this, that Gulliver is always caught in between, right? He has the body of a Yahoo, but the rationality of a human. Therefore, he's very uncomfortable in the chain, right? He's the middle link because he's the transitional point between the purely intelligent and the purely sensual. So he's somewhere hanging in between the Hobbesian and the Lockean idea of nature. Now, he's the third of 5 children. In Lilliput, he's too large. Brobdingnag, he's too small. He's not wholly governed by reason, not the most unteachable of brutes. And that is why Swift continuously, I come back to that slide, neither animal rational nor omni animal, but rationis capax. That is the basis of Swift's idea. But I have a certain different idea to propose. And this is not James Clifford. This is yours truly, me. And I'm suggesting that there's a third possibility which opens up. And that is what I call the harder than the hard school. The hard school said that man was a Yahoo. The soft school said that man was neither a Yahoo nor a human. And I am proposing that there is within Swift a theory that man can be rational and that rationality could be catastrophic. That rationality is not a state of pure rationality is not a state to be desired. And why do I say this? I say this because some of the basic institutions of humanity are absent in homonym land. So homonyms have no sense of family or love. They procreate only for the sake of procreation and enlarging the herd. Their children are immediately sent away to different other academies. Secondly, the homonyms have no love, really love for one another. They have benevolence, but there's no depth of feeling for one another, right? So this, and thirdly, you see, they cannot accept any Yahoo, and they keep them perpetually in the name of disciplining them under their control. So reason leads to power, and power leads to total domination. Thirdly, very importantly, in the final council, the homonyms discuss the need to exterminate all Yahoos. Therefore, rationality is being utilized by the homonyms to justify mass slaughter. And you can see the parallels of Swift anticipating Adorno and Horkheimer's, where Adorno and Horkheimer talk about this question of reason being employed during the Holocaust to justify the extermination of the Jews. Therefore, you can see how I'm arguing that a state of utter rationality without human sentiment and emotions is seen by Swift as something which is not desirable at all. This is my hypothesis. You see, for this, I take up a passage from Brobdingnag. Now, in Brobdingnag, the Brobdingnagian king continuously dismisses Gulliver and humanity as something which is like a vermin that crawled upon the earth. Gulliver is very angry. What does he do? He says, "Oh, you know what we can invent?" And he shows the king, or he talks to the king about two discoveries. One is gunpowder, and the other is the pistol or the cannon. And the king is struck with horror. Impotent and groveling an insect like I could entertain such inhuman ideas, to appear wholly unmoved at all the scenes of blood and desolation, which I had painted as the common effects of those destructive machines. Some evil genius, enemy to mankind, must have been the first contriver. So you see, what does science and reason provide man? The gateway to destruction. And therefore, Swift suggests that a perfect rationality and a perfect science are only instruments to human destruction. It is not desirable at all. For those of you of my generation who did in our high secondary years a play called Progress, where you see Professor Corey devises a bomb, and his sister actually destroys that invention because she says humanity is much more important than reason or science. And therefore, in another passage, the king talks about whoever could make 2 years of corn to grow upon a spot of ground where one grew before would deserve better of mankind. So Swift is not looking at science as the solution of man. Why? You see, this is where I come back to my earlier point about Swift's positionality as a Catholic priest. And this is what is absent in Gulliver's. And this is something which students need to be very cautious about. Why does a cardinal, why does a Catholic priest not include religion in the utopia or the dystopia that it creates? Religion is absent. Therefore, while religion is not present in the homonym land, as William Casement points out, its absence looms large. And therefore, the element is absent so that you can always wonder about its absence. You have to ponder about what is missing, right? But Swift does mention this, and he talks about the first Yahoos who came to the island, driven thither over the sea, being forsaken by their companions, they retired to the mountains and degenerating by degrees in process of time and more savage than those of their own species. So it's this question of the original sin, the vitiation of the Garden of Eden, as it were, and degeneration into a life of sinfulness without any potential grace. And therefore,
Hello, sir. Professor Shen, am I audible? I think sir must have got disconnected or there are some serious audio issues there. Sir, am I audible?
Should I call him?
Uh,
May I call him?
Sir, could you give him a call? Yes.
Okay.
Bear with us, please. Sir has got disconnected somehow. There are some network issues, I think. So participants, please wait.
Oyon,
Sir?
phone switched off. His phone is switched off.
And somehow no battery, I think. You must have run out of charge. Let us wait for some time, sir. 1 minute or so.
But if he goes on, taking it for granted that everything is fine, then it will be a problem.
I don't think so because
No, Soikot, I have not tried the second number. I have only one number with me, the BSNL number.
Shoykot, could you please post that second number or could you please forward the number to NGM, sir? That way he would be able to reach him at that number. Please do that, Shoykot. Asking all to patiently wait. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Shoykot.
No, both are switched off. Both the numbers are switched off.
Oh my God. So wait for some time and then try once more. Yeah, really sad. He was going brilliant as usual. From the beginning itself, I found that there were some audio issues. Sometimes his voice was breaking.
Anindo, could you call Sumidhi, please?
Yes, that's a good solution, Shoykot has given us. Onindoda, are you there? If you could call Moushumidi, that might solve the problem.
Absolutely, Amrita. He was going brilliant. And right then, there was this technical glitches. There were all these glitches.
Sir, could you try once more?
Asking me, you.
Yes, yes, sir.
কল করছে সেটি এখন সুইচড অফ আছে অনুগ্রহ
No. Again switched off.
Still switched off. I guess sir was trying from his laptop. He was presenting from his laptop. I don't even know whether sir is aware that he has got disconnected.
If he is there in Kolkata, it won't be a problem. But if he is at Bolpur, it might be a problem because he said earlier that at Bolpur there are always some such problems, network.
Network issues. Okay.
So I don't know where he is now. In Kolkata or at Bolpur, I don't know.
Yes, Prashant, that's a good solution. But for that, sir has to join. You're not being able to reach him. Unfortunate for us. Onindoda just sent me a WhatsApp message that he has communicated things to Professor Shen's mother. So let's see, sir.
Okay.
Let us wait for some time. I think sir will rejoin. Thank you for your patience.
So let me call him. Okay, he is available now.
Okay, please do, sir. Please do.
घरों से बाहर तभी निकलें जब बहुत आवश्यक हो फेस कवर या मास्क पहनते समय ध्यान रहे कि मुंह और नाक अच्छी तरह से ढके
No, not again reachable.
No idea what to do, sir. Did you get a message that he is available to take calls?
Yes, he is available. That message came, but I tried
Okay.
on that number, but again it was unreachable.
Right.
नमस्कार
To stop the spread of coronavirus disease or COVID-19, we will have to stay indoors. Step out only if it is very essential and keep a distance of at least 1.
আমি চেষ্টা করছি গো।
ও আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, বলছি
কোনো কারণে নেটওয়ার্কে একটা গন্ডগোল হয়ে গেছে।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, মানে আমি ভাবলাম তুমি বোধহয় কন্টিনিউ করতে বুঝতে পারোনি হয়তো।
কত দূর অবধি পেয়েছিল গো?
মিনিট 6 হবে আর কি, 6 মিনিট আগে মোটামুটি।
আচ্ছা, ওকে,
হ্যাঁ 6 মিনিটস হলো মোটামুটি।
Sir is in. We are so happy to have you back, sir. Sir, please unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, my network betrayed me today.
We are extremely happy to have you back, sir. Please go on.
Let me just share the screen if it's possible.
Yes, sir. Yes. Take your time, sir.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. Could you make it in the full screen mode?
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. Where had I sort of disappeared? Which point?
The Yahoo slide was there, I think.
The Yahoo and the original thing.
Yeah. That one, sir.
Right. So I was talking
Sir, you're
about.
telling about that rationality and reason is not desirable and Swift is not looking science as a solution to man's problems. Sir, told up to this, sir. Sir, this is Shruti-Smita.
Right. Okay. So I had shown this voyage to Brobdingnag as an example of why Swift is not there. Anyways, let me get back. The idea of that I was sort of delving on was the harder than the hard school, where science is not at all, or a state of pure reason is something which is to be desired at all. It's not something which is an utopia in itself. And Swift is using Brobdingnag as an example, where Gulliver, when he talks to the Brobdingnagian king and is dismissed by the Brobdingnagian king, actually, sort of shows him two inventions, or talks to him about two inventions, that of gunpowder and that of the cannon. And the king is so horrified that a tiny, puny animal like man, and I hope you look at this slide, you see, so impotent and groveling as insect as I could entertain such inhuman ideas, as to appear so wholly unmoved at all, the scenes of blood and desolation suggests the state of pure reason and science only leads man to a state of collapse, as it were, to a state where it is so ironical. The truth is that perfectly rational state can equally be a perfectly Hobbesian state. You see how Swift is probing into these dysfunctional spaces, as it were. And he suggests that whoever can make 2 ears of corn, this is the Brobdingnagian king, is upon 2 blades of grass to grow up on a spot where one grew before, that is the true man, right? So that is where you see once again Swift's distrust, mistrust. Am I audible? Just checking. Am I audible here?
No, Amrit, there are certain problems with your audio.
Okay.
It's not very clear.
Your voice is breaking sometimes.
I'm sorry, because this is a different internet access that I'm using, so.
Sir, could you please switch your video off? That might solve the
that's
problem.
right. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Okay, right. I've switched the. Is it better now? Slightly.
Yes, Amrit, it is better
It's
now.
better.
Better.
And
Okay.
we also request users to kindly turn off their video and also
Yes,
mute
please.
their audio. Otherwise, there
Buddhadev
will be
Das,
a
please
problem
turn off your video. Buddhadev Das, please turn off your video. We want to concentrate on Professor Shen right now. Yes, sir, please.
Is the scene, is the PowerPoint visible?
Oh, the PowerPoint is not. Yeah, it's visible now, sir. It's
Right.
visible now.
Okay. Right. So, talk about interruptions when you think about Swift. Right. So, what is absent in Gulliver's Travels, therefore, is something which I would like to ponder for a moment. And this is the absence of religion. Where William Caseman, when he talked about human land, about has been present in Gulliver's Travels, yet the absence loom large. So, untesting religion, the discourse of religion is beyond the dialogue of reason and animal of Hobbes and Locke in Gulliver's Travels. And Swift suggests that if there is religion, ethical and moral, a solution to this binary can be found. He talks about the Yahoos and their original sin. For example, two Yahoos who came originally, then degenerated into a sinful life. And it is therefore that they become progressively animal-like. So Swift suggests, therefore, that the alternative might be in a Christian benevolence that can temper human and can also qualify human Pedro Mendes as an alternative to Swift. Right. So Mendes embodies Christian morality, offers Gulliver his best suit of clothes, feeds him extravagantly, brings him home free of charge, houses him for some time, and pays his way back to England. Does not seek anything in return. So he's the figure of the good Samaritan, the good Christian Samaritan, who offers a way out of the dichotomy between the Hobbesian and the Lockean, binary as it. That's therefore is how himself and God forced to ponder the depths of human rationality. It also talked about Swift as being one of the first anti-colonialists, as it were. You remember, he is, after all, an Irishman who was pulverized by British colonialism, wrote letters, reportedly to process of European colonization in the book of Humanims, because he sees that the Humanims are in an exact colonial position as the Englishmen are upon these tribes. You can see that quotation. I am not going to read it because I'm overshooting my time. How, the Humanims, the Englishmen or the Europeans are perpetrating the same kind of mass act colonization as a strategy demands. Again, not
Sorry, sir, can't hear you.
I think that Am I audible now?
You are, sir.
Is the audio better right now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right. Okay. Maybe I'll sort of not. Is the presentation visible, by the way?
It is visible, sir.
Right. So the question therefore remains. I go back to the earlier slide where I was talking about Swift and the anti-colonial satire in Gulliver's Travels, Book 4. By the way, if I'm not audible, just give me a ring, right, so that I can understand and rectify the problem. Right. So Swift is using, a passage in Gulliver's Travels, Book 4, where he talks about the crew of pirates, where he talks about, the way in which the natives are displaced and they're massacred by the European colonizers. Now, why does Gulliver bring this passage in Book 4? Is it because he sees the Houyhnhnms as driven by reason, perpetrating the same problem of colonization on the Yahoos? Therefore, is a state of perfect rationality or enhanced rationality a recipe for colonialism and imperialism? Is human rationality always integrated with power relations? Swift is probing into these difficult zones through this particular satire. Now, this is another slide which I was talking about, why use the horses? And this is a question that many of my students put before me. Why the animal, the horse as the animal? You see, because, to prove the older Aristotelian thesis of man as the animal rationale, homo est animal rationale, Swift needed an animal which was seen to be the antithesis of rationality. And you can see that in classical literature, you see, the horse is seen as the most irrational of animals. Yeah, I've talked about Porphyry's Isagoge, and therefore the binary is between the homo and the equus, and therefore the equus is seen as the animal hinible, right? And you can see where the word houyhnhnms come from, whining of the horses, hinible, as it were, making this dichotomy clearer. So a perfect rationality, and you can see how Swift is playing around, is a perfect rationality once again leading us towards a perfect state of being animal, being violent, being Hobbesian. So my question is, Swift is probably suggesting that this is a dichotomy between Hobbes and Locke. So Hobbes is for the state of nature of misery, Locke is for the state of nature for rationality. But is a state of actual rationality leading us on to a more Hobbesian state of misery, conflict, power, and therefore a more animalistic state? See how Swift is cleverly, continuously poking us, vexing us, rather than to divert us. And how does he link up the 4 books of Gulliver's Travels? I'm suggesting he links it up through certain images, apart from the figure of Gulliver. What are these images? Glasses. How does one see man? How does one see human nature? The body, right? The Enlightenment prioritized the mind over the body. Swift is prioritizing the body over the mind. And he's suggesting that grace is needed, Christian grace, to tide over or to bridge this gap between the body and the mind. There needs to be a moral fabric. The question of beasts and vermin. Every single book talks about some form of beast or the other, some form of animal or the other. Once again, drawing the proximity between human and the animal. And of course, the images of scatology, filth, feces, urine. Right, and why is it done? Because once again, to foreground the gross human body and suggest that the animal body of the horse is ironic, because the more we move towards sense, the more our beastly impulses are generated. So whether rationality can actually lead us away from our body is a fundamental philosophical question that Swift is asking. Let me conclude now. Swift uses the narrative of Menippean satire to interrogate the philosophical transition of the period. The Hobbes-Locke dichotomy becomes the gateway, and Swift is probing into these fundamental ideas as they emerge. So in that sense, this Menippean satire is extremely contemporary, as it were. Book 4 is in many ways the climax of his consistent position on reason and the body. He's interrogating these categories. All travel outwards is therefore a travel into philosophy and the nature of man. Religion remains an absent presence in Gulliver's Travels, which suggests that without it, human society is always incomplete. In using Gulliver cleverly with Pedro Mendes, Swift is perpetually engaging the reader to think and to ponder over ways of seeing. And that is why that image of the spectacles remains so very important. How does one visualize man is the central question of Gulliver's Travels. Swift continuously probes the space between narrative persona Gulliver and the author Swift. It is in this narrative ingenuity that the satirical possibilities of Gulliver's Travels is explored. And finally, the images play a key role in linking the various books together. Thank you for your patience in tolerating the different problems of technology. If you feel you have to write anything to me or clarify anything, add anything to this, you're very welcome to write to me at my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for such a concise but marvelous deliberation that really makes us enlightened. Now, may I request Professor Oyam Mondal, sir, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of English, Bankura Christian College, to conduct the interactive session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madhurima. Thank you, Professor Shen, for such a wonderful deliberation. Despite the network issues and the technical glitches, it was really a treat for us. Now the session is welcome. It is open for questions, interactions, observations. So if anybody has anything to ask, I think Professor Shen is ready to answer them. You might unmute yourself and put your questions to Professor Shen, or you might post them in the chat box. Yeah, I can find a question from Siddheshwar Nag, sir. Why you are saying that religion is absent present in Gulliver's Travels? Over to you, Professor Shen.
Right. You see, my point is that Swift was a Catholic priest. Yet when he talks about utopia and dystopias in Gulliver's Travels, the one notorious absent across the travels, although there are certain references to priests, is religion. So when every society is described, its religion remains absent. There's no category of religion as it were discussed in Gulliver's book. And it is therefore that I'm looking at what this absence does. Because for the Augustans, this absence would have been much more notable than for us in the postmodern age. Now, therefore, it's forcing the readers to ask that what does this absence of religion, every society tends towards exploitation, greed, power, bestiality, as it were. The body is foregrounded. Therefore, the question is, so every utopia is actually a dystopia. Lilliput is a dystopia. Brobdingnag is a utopia based on which human society is a dystopia. Laputa is a dystopia. Yahoo is a dystopia. Even Humanim Land is not an utopia. That's what I argued. Therefore, what is lacking? what is missing? What is a missing component of all these dystopias? It is, Swift suggests, grace, religious morality, religious feeling. This is Swift's idea that Christian morality and Christian benevolence, when absent from either animal or purely rational societies, leads always to incomplete societies. That is where the absent presence remains of religion.
Thank you, sir. There is a question from Hridoy Das. Why does Gulliver's Travels why is it known as a Newgate pastoral?
Gulliver's Travels is not known as a Newgate pastoral. It was the Beggar's Opera.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I have no clue as whether Gulliver's Travels was ever referred to as a Newgate pastoral. I don't think so. The Newgate pastoral was, if you look at it correctly, probably Beggar's Opera. Newgate does not feature in Gulliver's Travels.
Thank you, sir. There is a question by Tumpa Godai. Sir, can you please once again explain the use of the horse image, because your voice was breaking at that time?
Right. I apologize profusely to all of you, but let me assure that this is a very Swiftian interruption, because Swift always wanted that his meanings would be latent rather than very obvious. Now, you see, in the classical era, you all have known this phrase, man is a rational animal, actually comes from Aristotle, right? As students of political science know it better than me. And the phrase is homo est animal rational, right? So in the classical era, the animal who was seen as the antithesis of the animal rationale of the homo was the equus, the horse, right? And it is recurrently used as a figure of irrationality, and therefore it is known as the animal hinibil. So an animal where rationality is restricted. So when Swift was defamiliarizing human reason and putting it over an animal, he had to choose the most irrational animal. And therefore, from the classical sources, he chose the equus, the horse. That is the reason that the horse is used.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for that brilliant presentation. Over to my student Bipasha now. Bipasha, are you there?
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Audible.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of the Department of English, Bankura Christian College, I would like to convey my sincere gratitude and thankfulness to Professor Amit sir for illuminating us with such an insightful and thought-provoking lecture. Thank you very much, sir. We also acknowledge with due respect your support and solidarity to help the students and the researchers as well in accepting our invitation. All the faculty members, research scholars, students will surely be benefited to a great extent from this lecture. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now, may I request my junior Madhurima Ghosh to conduct the second session. Over to you, Madhurima.
Thank you, Bipasha Di. Our second speaker in today's session is Dr. Windrila Ghosh ma'am, Associate Professor, Department of English, Diamond Harbour Women's University. Before I request Dr. Windrila Ghosh ma'am to go ahead with her deliberation in the second session, may I request Professor Oyam Mundal sir, Assistant Professor and Head, Department of English, Bankura Christian College, to formally introduce Dr. Windrila Ghosh ma'am. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madhurima, for giving me the privilege of introducing Dr. Oyindrila Ghosh, Oyindrila D as I address her. Dr. Oyindrila Ghosh is currently Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, Diamond Harbour Women's University. Her doctoral thesis awarded by Jadavpur University was on the treatment of motherhood in the shorter fiction of Thomas Hardy. She has been twice awarded the Charles Wallace India Trust UK Short Research Grant 2009 and 2019 for pre- and postdoctoral research respectively. She had been invited twice to Dorchester as speaker by the Thomas Hardy Society UK at the biennial conferences in 2014 and 2016, and also been the recipient of their prestigious Frank Pinion Award in 2014. She had also been invited as speaker at the Arts and Humanities Research Council sponsored AHRC workshop on institutions of literature at the University of York, UK in December 2017. She is currently the checklister from India for the Directory of Latest Scholarship on Thomas Hardy for the Thomas Hardy Association, USA. She was also a postdoctoral UGC associate at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla in 2016, 2018, and 2019. She has 2 edited volumes to her credit: Protean Images, a study of womanhood in Victorian society and literature, published in 2017, and An Enigma Called Emily, Reassessing Emily Bronte at 200, published 2019. While the third on gender and the supernatural in the Victorian short story is under preparation. Her current research interests and projects are centered on Bollywood adaptations of Hardy's works and in establishing the probable Indian connections Thomas Hardy had through his unpublished epistolary correspondences, the latter being her independent postdoctoral project supported by the CWIT grant. So when I say that Dr. Oindrila Ghosh is an authority on Thomas Hardy, I am certainly not exaggerating. Over to you, Dr. Oindrila Ghosh. Oindrila D, please.
First of all, am I audible?
You are perfectly audible.
Okay. Thank you, Arun, for that very lengthy introduction. I had requested you to cut it short. But anyway, thank you so much. And I would also like to thank the Department of English, Bankura Christian College, and Arun for inviting me to this very wonderful venture that the department has taken up for the benefit of students and scholars. And I feel honored to be part of it. And also to the students who are doing enormously good work and managing everything and talking to speakers. So I really appreciate it. It's a collaborative venture between students and teachers. That is the way that it should be. So again, I think I will try to share my screen and my PowerPoint presentation because I'll keep referring to it as I start talking about Hardy. Just bear with me for a while.
I would request all other participants except Dr. Ghosh to kindly mute your microphones and switch your videos off. Please do that. It interrupts us a lot.
Okay, just a minute. Is the PowerPoint visible? Is the PowerPoint?
It's not yet visible, Anjali.
Okay. I don't know how to go about that. Just a minute. So I go from the present now option and then try to share this.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yes. Okay. Now, first of all, you have to open the file in your screen, Anjali. After that, you
which I have already
click on
done.
Okay, now click on the present now option. Then share the screen.
Visible now?
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay. Just tell me when it's.
Yeah. It has come now.
Okay.
Could you please make the presentation in the full screen mode, Oindrila? Yes. It's okay now.
Yeah. Okay. I will begin with a quotation by Hardy himself, and I'm quoting it. If I were a woman, I should think twice before entering into matrimony in these days of emancipation when everything is open to the sex. Close quotes. These words by Hardy when he was nearly 80 and living at a time of fast-paced transition with women being given voting rights on the occasion of the birth of a baby to his wife's married sister. Now, very simple words these, but strong pointers to the fact that Hardy had finally imbibed his mother's unfavorable views of marriage and had come to think of it and of motherhood as burdens, which often caught women on the wrong foot, stunting them forever. This is very interesting when read in juxtaposition with the restrictive lives that mid-Victorian women, and women of all classes I mean, actually led deprived of formal education till the 1860s or forced to curtail ambition or professional aspirations, with no financial independence, not trusted with custody of their children, uh, at least before 1873 when the Infants Custody Act was passed in Victorian Britain. In stark contrast to this general Victorian restrictiveness in every sphere of life were Hardy's heroines of the novels and short stories, depicted as independent, enterprising, and skilled. Thus, Thomas Hardy, who was a late Victorian writer, chiefly celebrated for his deep interest in the natural world, its flora and its fauna, and of preservation of a fast-fleeting rural way of living, which he sought to locate under a partly real and partly dream country called Wessex, which we today know is the southwest of England, located chiefly in and around the county of Dorset, where Hardy was born and brought up and lived for most of his life, and also for a sensitive understanding of women's lives, minds, and psyche. Although he is still better known as a novelist, he was also a prolific writer, a short story writer, he was a prolific poet, a short story writer, writer of non-fictional prose, and of innumerable letters to fans and followers all over the globe. He is often celebrated for his sympathetic and deep portrayals of independent women in his fiction, which were quite rare at his time. Over the 2 centuries, his works have received mixed responses, and he has had his own share of critical bashing, often being labeled as misogynist, voyeurist, and of being at fault of stereotyping women according to Victorian conceptions. However, my very short talk is going to try to take you on a journey to understand the man and the writer who was neither trying to be a messiah, nor can he be called a monster when it came to the conceptualizing and depiction of women and the treatment of his women in his life and fiction, but as somebody who undoubtedly had a deep connection with women all his life and an understanding and empathy for the myriad deprivations and cruelties to which Victorian women were subjected based on glaring moral and social double standards. Now, I would like to shift to talking about Hardy's, a section from Hardy's latest biographer, Claire Tomalin, who has written a book called Thomas Hardy, The Time-Torn Man. And this is how she talks about the beginning of Hardy's life. And I quote, "At 8 o'clock, the child was born, apparently lifeless. He was put aside while his mother was seen to. Then the midwife, turning back to the small scrap of..."
Indilati, sorry for interrupting you. Are you by any chance using a headphone?
Yes.
Could you please hold the speaker of your headphone closer? Your voice is
I'm
not...
actually using earphones, not headphones.
Okay. That also has a speaker. So if you could...
Is it better now? Is it better? Is it any better?
Is it okay now? I'm asking the participants. I don't know whether it's, yeah, it's clear now, Angela. Okay.
Is it okay? Okay.
It's okay.
Just feel free to interrupt me at any
No,
point if I'm inaudible, because
Okay,
I
it's
really
okay. It's
I'm
okay,
not very
Urmila.
familiar.
It's okay.
It's okay
Urmila,
now.
no problem.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So Claire Tomalin, from whose biography I'm trying to quote this section. Then the midwife, turning back to the small scrap of humanity, looked closely at him and exclaimed, "Dead? Stop a minute. He's alive enough for sure." And so he was, tiny, weak, hardly expected to survive long, but not dead yet. Unquote. The intervention of the midwife, a woman, had saved him right at his inception, and Hardy was a frail child for many years into his life, somebody who was kept at home and could attend school only at the age of 8 or 9. So again, his early childhood was heavily influenced by his proximity with women of his household. The major concern of the late Victorian novelists was centered around issues of sexual iniquities and tragedies evolving out of blatant double standards. And foremost among all these writers was Hardy, a male novelist who nevertheless was deeply invested in the lot of women. More than in men, it is in women that Hardy seems to be exploring not merely the realities but also the mysteries of life. Hardy's men, if you notice each of them, are not often complex. They are simple, easy to understand, and even in a character like Michael Henchard, who is conceived of as Hardy's new man, if you try to analyze his character, his passions, his emotions are not very difficult to understand. He almost wears them on his sleeve. But much unlike Hardy's women, who are robust, complex, and as mysterious perhaps as life itself. Also, Hardy's female characters in the novels and the shorter fiction are not often all fictitious and imaginary. Scholarship and biographical research have now been able to locate tangible evidences of the living men and women who inspired the novelist in shaping his characters. In fact, Hardy himself had noted once, saying this, "I find it a great advantage to be actually among the people described at the time of describing them." So again, with this, I will just move over to a few slides trying to show you the important women in Hardy's life, about whom I'm going to talk during the course of the lecture. So you have Jemima Hand Hardy, Hardy's mother. You have Emma Lavinia Hardy, Hardy's first wife. You have Florence Dugdale, left corner below, who was Hardy's second wife, and Tryphena Sparks, Hardy's cousin. So keep these pictures in mind, and when I reach them, you can relate to that. In Hardy's work, woman, despite being daughter, sister, lover, wife, or mother, never really gets subsumed into just these roles. The evolution and emergence of the new woman and a sense of female empowerment are common themes in most of Hardy's major novels and even the short stories. The spirit of self-sacrifice and long-suffering passivity, which went with the traditional concept of woman's duty in Victorian times, is certainly not native to Thomas Hardy's spirited heroines. If they do eventually have to submit to the predestined Victorian woman's lot, it is in an active spirit of a deliberately chosen renunciation achieved through struggle and effort. Hardy's own experience of being childless from both his marriages and his belief in women's empowerment made him share views similar to 21st century writers rather than those of his Victorian contemporaries who felt women were incomplete if they did not become mothers. A decade before Sarah Grant coined the term the new woman, Hardy depicted his heroines as strong-willed, determined, and independent women, and like Mary Wollstonecraft, Hardy too seemed to be of the view that while women would continue to have children as part of their biological role, their role as mothers should not preclude their rights as human beings. Hardy's sensitive depiction of women in his short stories showcases the trials and tribulations inherent in the lives of women and their aspirations for independence and selfhood, rarely depicted with sensitivity in Victorian fiction. Looking looking at examples from his heroines like Bathsheba, who runs her own farm with energy, enterprise, and independence, to Tess, who tries to earn first as field woman after the birth of a child, and later as dairymaid, to Elizabeth Jane, who becomes a companion to the rich Lucetta when she seeks to move out of her stepfather's home. Such instances, and of others like Lizzie, who's a young widow in one of very interesting short stories of Hardy called The Distracted Preacher from his collection of tales called the Wessex Tales, practices an adventurous career of a smuggler and refuses to be subsumed into a domestic life of marriage and motherhood. In these stories, I'm not trying to go into much of the short stories because I feel that not many would be aware with the short stories as they are with perhaps the novels of Hardy. In these stories and in the novels and innumerable other places, the woman retains, or at least seeks to retain, her identity as an individual in the Hardy universe. One could trace the origin of such novel sentiments with respect to women in this contemporary society from his earliest and deepest of bonds, his relationship with his mother, which was perhaps the dominant and unwavering influence, and one which helped shape his conception of women, an influence which proved to be both positive as well as negative in shaping his other relationships, and the one which definitely was instrumental in generating and nurturing what Hardy started defining as loving kindness in his vision of women and all things sentient. There have been many critics who have tried to talk about the character and personality of Jemima and the relationship that and the influence that she had on her son, but I choose to talk about a passage from one of important critics of Hardy, Pamela Jekyll, and it's there up on the screen for you to read. I have highlighted certain sections from that quotation to make a point. If you notice, Jemima is shown as a woman who had rather cynical views about love and marriage, and it is very interesting to relate it to the fact that apart from Hardy, all the other Hardy siblings remained unmarried throughout their life, and the relationship between Hardy's first wife and his mother were extremely bitter and also a cause of contention between mother and son. And the other section of the quotation, where Jekyll says, "It is difficult to say to what extent Mrs. Hardy influenced her son, but it is certain that her imprint was felt in his understanding portrayals of women and as people. His mother's attitude must have had an influence on Hardy's perceptions of women and their faith in love and marriage." So this is important in trying to understand Hardy's vision and attitude towards women. And perhaps Hardy harbored an unusual view about motherhood and childbirth because of this influence of his mother, which was in him owing to the earliest memories of his life of being an unwanted or untimely child to his parents, especially to his mother. Jemima's marriage to Thomas Hardy Sr. was a reluctant one, obviously because she was already pregnant and the marriage had to be completed in a hurry. And Hardy's most recent biographer I've mentioned, Tomalin, who tells us that motherhood closed many doors for her, a fact that affected Hardy deeply, and a sensitive person that he was, he breathed on the discovery that he had been an unwanted child who had prevented his mother from living the life she had hoped to set up for herself, and how much of this may have contributed to the dark moods in his life is something for us to conjecture. But it is noticeable that when he wrote fictional accounts of country girls seduced and pregnant, he made Fanny, Robin, and Tess into romantic figures and victims betrayed by men of higher social standing and driven to unhappiness and death. Hardy, of course, understood his mother's plight and looked upon motherhood as a kind of trap for working class women by which their aspirations for greater possibilities of attaining selfhood were nipped in the bud. In his own time, braving the scathing criticism of leaders and critics alike, he dared to express his nonconformist thoughts on marriage, women's emancipation, and motherhood repeatedly, so much so that a lot of his contemporaries criticized him. And one chief among them was Margaret Oliphant, who attacked him after the publication of Jude the Obscure in 1895, his last published novel, after which, unfortunately, he gave up writing novels because he felt the audience in England, the readership in England, was not prepared for the ideas that he was trying to share with them, and which he was confident that in 50 and 100 years' time would be taken for granted by society. And Mrs. Oliphant charged him of committing profanities against the sacred institution of marriage in her essay, The Anti-Marriage League. Now, if you wish to fathom the depths of his sensitivity and empathy for foreign women, you simply need to turn to Hardy's poetry. Perhaps his allegiance developed due to Hardy's sensitiveness to rural tragedy centering around ruined maids or fallen women in his native Wessex, highlighting the ruined maid motif in Hardy's prose and verse, such as poems such as A Ruined Maid and A Sunday Morning Tragedy. Desmond Hawkins sees in it a proof of Hardy's intense sympathy for the suffering of women. The unhappy endings in real life, as he witnessed firsthand, were often tragic and brutal. Public disgrace, suicide, crude abortions, infanticide, prostitution. It was these disfigurements and mutilations of the natural sexuality of women that aroused in Hardy a deep, what later critics have branded as feminist sympathy. Illicit unions and illegitimate births, to use the jargon of public morality, were a subject of his continuing meditation. If you just have a look at this slide, where I've tried to bring a few paragraphs from the two poems, the one on the left is from The Ruined Maid, and one on the right is from A Sunday Morning Tragedy. You can read the poems on your own once the lecture is over, but I have tried to highlight certain lines. The first poem is
Hello? Hello? I think she has got disconnected. Let's wait. Let's wait for her to rejoin. Hello?
yes, Arun, I'm back.
Yeah.
So
That's great. Welcome back.
where was I lost, and from where should I begin?
Very last slide that you were
Okay.
talking about.
Last slide. Okay, I was talking about the poetry. Okay, I'll once again share my.
Yes, the highlighted lines of the poems.
Okay. No, not much. So as I was saying, I was trying to point out the bitter irony that is evident in the first poem, The Ruined Maid, of the clash between the loss of chastity, the loss that is sort of something that never can be got back. The idea of chastity once lost can never be regained. That was part of deeply ingrained in the fabric of Victorian society and morality, and the material gain that the girl has had. And the irony is evoked through the clash of the innocence of the girl from the village and the experience of the girl from the city. And moving over to the other poem.
Pointilati, your presentation is not visible. So could you share your screen once more?
Just a minute. Now?
It's appearing now.
Yeah, it will come. Okay. The other one is about
Full screen mode, please. Pointilati, full screen mode, please. Okay.
The other one is about the Sunday morning tragedy, which brings out the idea of unwed pregnancies in rural Wessex, and how these village quirks would be depended upon for these herbs and other ways of aborting these children, and how a lot of young girls would die because of the process, and how this is written in the speaker of the poem is a mother who is lamenting the death of a very beautiful daughter because of these of such an episode where she has had to give her a kind of herb which has actually resulted not only just the abortion but the death of the child. And the lines that I have tried to highlight is points out to this idea that Hardy was trying to throw at the face of Victorian morality, that why would these be these pregnancies which were not crimes on the part of women, only women, would be considered as ill motherings, and for which the women would have to try to hide them and in the process perhaps give up their lives. So again, these are issues that were close to Hardy's heart, and these are things that kept coming back. You are aware of its recurrence in the tragedy of Fanny Robin. This idea of the fallen woman, the unwed mother, and the way that their ruin is certain, ruin and death are certain in Victorian fiction. So again, coming back to the idea that of all these, the influence of Hardy's mother and her personal experience was played a very important role in harboring these ideas in Hardy's mind. If I turn to a novel like The Return,
Pointilati, please unmute yourself. Mistakenly, I muted you. Please unmute yourself, Pointilati. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
if you move to a novel like The Return of the Native, one could find the projection of Hardy's feelings about his own mother in the character of the strong and disciplinarian Mrs. Hoopwright. The relationship between the mother and the son and the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law were not quite smooth in the novel. And we learn that, and I've already mentioned, the relationship between Emma, Hardy's first wife, and Jemima did not, and the two of them did not go on well, and there may have been jealousy on Jemima's part. So again, everywhere, the influence that the real women had on Hardy's life keep coming back as a kind of storehouse of memories and feelings that he keeps using in his fiction. Other important women in Hardy's early life were his cousin Tryphena Sparks. The influence of Tryphena Sparks upon Hardy's work and personality was crucial. She was Hardy's cousin, and with whom he fell in love and got engaged in 1867. At that time, Tryphena was only 16, 11 years Hardy's junior. She was talented, strong-willed, and capricious. In Tess of the D'Urbervilles, much of the characterization of Tess has been pointed out by critics, has a great deal of Tryphena sparks in her. As well as you have the naming of a bird called Fena in the same novel. And on her death, he wrote a poem, Thoughts of Fena, and another to a motherless child, which was dedicated to Tryphena's daughter, and whom Hardy happened to meet after the mother's death. Lola Deacon, who's an important Hardy critic, in her book called Providence and Mr. Hardy, made a scandalous and titillating suggestion about Hardy having fathered Tryphena's illegitimate child, which has of course been refuted by Hardy's authentic biographers like Michael Milgate and Robert Gittings for lack of evidence. But what I'm trying to suggest is that the importance, the significance that each of these relationships of these real women that Hardy had during his life have touched him and brought back memories of them in his art. There were several other women who influenced Hardy in his early life, as Julia Augusta Martin, wife of the local landlord in Upper Bookhampton, the place where Hardy was born and brought up, where Hardy attended his first formal school. So fond and affectionate was she towards Hardy that a deep bond was established, so much so that at the age of 8, Hardy almost thought of her as a lover. He met her many years later, almost 22 years later, and recalled her with more than ordinary affection. And when he was writing his novel Two on a Tower, the choice of the surname Martin for the hero Swithin's grandmother is, according to Richard Taylor, a clear indication of him inwardly turning to his ambivalent relationship with Julia Martin in conceptualizing Swithin's relationship with the married and much older Lady Viviette Constantine. Another important influence on Hardy during his teenage years was an episode involving a woman. And I will now refer you to a slide. Involving a woman, where he was witness to the last public execution by hanging of a woman called Martha Brown, who was prosecuted for murdering her second husband. At 16, if you see Hardy's own words from a letter which he wrote 70 years later, shows that he's extremely guilty for being complicit, what he feels to be complicit in being a voyeur to that gruesome spectacle. And he gives his excuses for having been present to witness that. And it left an indelible mark on his life, which kept coming back in episodes which he narrated in his shorter fiction. And the one that most of you are aware of is the commonly known story of Tess's murder of Alec and of her final execution. In 1922, in a letter to Agnes Grove is here, down below. So in 1922, letter to Agnes Grove, Hardy refused to entertain a female thesis writer whom she had recommended. He says, "I'm sorry I'm unable to be interviewed by the young woman. I have many such applications to obtain personal details which are quite unnecessary for writing a thesis. That should be based on published works alone, of course." Close quotes. This is a clear warning that he gives against intrusion into his privacy. However, to explore fully Hardy's attitude to women, it is necessary to take into account at least his relationships with his two wives, both of whom had literary ambitions, and with his literary ladies whom he treated as protégées, revising their work, urging reluctant publishers on their behalf, and even painstakingly correcting their proofs. And the presence of his first wife, Emma Gifford, whom he met in the most romantic circumstances in 1870 at St. Juliot Rectory in Cornwall on an architectural renovation job, because if you remember, if you've read Hardy's biography, Hardy was an architect by profession before he turned to full-time writing, and got married to after prolonged courtship in 1874, was a major influence in his life and career as a writer. She had her own literary ambitions, which again Hardy never furthered and never supported. That is a different story. And was a support system for Hardy, acting as his amanuensis in composing manuscripts of several of his novels. However, after 4 or 5 years of marriage, when the relationship between the two got bitter and estrangement set in, by the time that Emma Hardy retired to the attic of Maxgate, she was frustrated and disillusioned at both personal and literary levels. Witnessing Hardy's susceptibility to younger, beautiful, often aristocratic women who were his literary proteges, like Rosamund Thompson, Florence Henniker, Agnes Grove, Florence Dugdale, who later became Florence Dugdale Hardy, it must have pained Emma to realize her husband's insensitive disregard of her own literary aspirations. It is interesting to remember that the gradually embittered relationship between the couple got further aggravated by Emma's taking Hardy's views on marriage in his later novels like Tess, Jude, as a comment on theirs, pushing her to isolation and estrangement till her death. Yet, her influence on Hardy was scarcely better understood than in his elegies of love and regret after her sudden demise, which are called the Poems of 1912 and 13, one of the finest group of love poems and elegies in Hardy's oeuvre. Florence Dugdale, who happened to be Hardy's secretary and became the second Mrs. Hardy after Emma's death, realized, just like Emma, that Hardy was unenthusiastic about an author wife, though he was very keen on furthering the ambitions and careers of writers such as Mrs. Florence Henniker, and even of Florence when she was just a secretary. The most mediocre of her stories were very, very encouragingly proofread and sort of helped to be made better by Hardy. So again, there was a kind of duality in Hardy with respect to female literary ambition. And interestingly, I will again take you back to this slide where you see the pictures of Agnes Grove and Florence Henniker, who was a major influence in the later years of Hardy's life, whom he met in 1893 during his visit to Dublin, where the Hardys had been guests of her brother, Lord Houghton. Whether Hardy's increasing estrangement from Emma made him all the more susceptible to the charming, intuitive, married woman, or whether his transparently passionate affair with Mrs. Henniker resulted in the aggravation of marital disharmony, is difficult to determine. Within a month of his meeting, Hardy is keenly conscious of the one-sidedness of the relationship, and later he expresses his wish that Mrs. Henniker were more emancipated and free from certain retrograde superstitions. His relationship with her produced some of the finest letters he ever wrote, now collected in a volume called To One Rare Fair Woman. So, and before I move on to the next section, I will also point out this picture of Augusta Bugler and Gertrude Bugler. Augusta Bugler, at the age of 18, was a major influence in Hardy. She was a dairymaid, and who is actually the inspiration behind conceptualizing the character of Tess. And many years later, on coming back to Maxgate, when Hardy meets her grown-up daughter Gertrude and sees a striking resemblance with the young Augusta, Gertrude is taken as a major actress in Hardy's theatre group, the Hardy Players, and she plays the role of Tess in the adaptation of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which was directed and sort of improved by Hardy himself during his lifetime. While Tess and perhaps you are Sue Brighthead from Jude the Obscure are obvious choices to argue Hardy's feminist sympathies, Elaine Showalter, a major feminist critic, quite daringly chooses a self-ambivalence in Hardy's confessed woman-hater and misogynist Michael Henchard. Because it is in the analysis of this new man rather than in the evaluation of Hardy's new woman, she says, that the case for Hardy's feminist sympathies may be argued. To the feminist critic, Hardy presents an irresistible paradox. He is one of the few Victorian male novelists who wrote in what, according to Showalter, is a female tradition. At the beginning of his career, Hardy was greeted with the same kind of uncertainty that had been engendered by the pseudonymous publication of novels such as Jane Eyre and Adam Bede. And and readers and critics were unable to determine whether the author was a man or a woman. And it's interesting that Hardy's novel, early novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, which was also published anonymously, was initially conjectured to have been written by George Eliot. Showalter charts the process of Henchard's unmanning and shows how his humbling and loss of male power is really an educative and ennobling apprenticeship in human sensitivity. This is from an essay which I have put up in the reading list at the end of my lecture, which you can have a look at, which forces him to recognize the long repressed feminine side of himself and to discover his own suppressed or estranged capacity to love. The Showalter confidently asserts the fantasy that women hold men back, drag them down, drain their energy, divert their strength is nowhere so bleakly rebuked as in Hardy's tale of the man of character. It has always not been a bed of praises for him, but critiques and barbs of misogyny and voyeurism which have been directed at Hardy. Hardy's first attempts to write a tragedy in The Return of the Native, which was a double tragedy centering upon marriage, initiates a kind of sexist pattern, as has been pointed out by many a critic, which is often repeated in all his later novels. And what is this pattern like? That the man's tragedy is primarily intellectual and the woman's chiefly sexual. Though Showalter seems to have found the seeds of feminism in Hardy's characterization of the other critics have read the novel The Mayor of Casterbridge and Henchard at face value, accusing Hardy of surreptitiously using Henchard as the mouthpiece of his hostility towards women. And however, with regards to the fate of Tess also, this employment of the mechanism of plot as punishment that Hardy uses to hound his heroine to her death mars even such a sympathetic novel. Hardy's own way of looking at Tess is yet another form of possession, according to several critics.
Indradi, you are not audible. Hello? Hello?
Arun, could you contact her?
Yeah, she's joining, sir. Some serious network issues there are.
I think she's doing it from her mobile phone.
No, from a laptop only, sir. She's presenting things.
Yeah, that is right. That's right. YouTube link is already posted there. Is Aditi Jana. For your information, YouTube link is already posted there in the chat box. Okay, Indrila ma'am is back.
Yeah, sorry, but then again, when we are too dependent on machines and internet, this keeps happening. Very sorry, apologies.
No problem at all.
Again, I have to share my screen. Just a moment. Is it visible? Is the PPT visible?
No, not yet. Not yet,
Not yet.
Indrila, but it will appear.
Okay.
We have to wait for that.
Just let me know when it does.
Of course.
Okay. No, Indrila, it's not coming.
Okay, I'll do this once again.
It has come now. Please make it into full screen mode, Indrila. Yes, yes.
দুজনেরই ওরও প্রবলেম এরও প্রবলেম অমৃতেরও প্রচন্ড প্রবলেম
Okay, I was talking about this idea of Hardy also being a voyeur. Is it okay? Am I audible?
You're audible. You're audible.
Yeah, okay. So again, this critic, Janet Freeman, 1 minute, I have this up for you to be able to read this instead of listening to my quoting it. This idea of treating the plot as punishment the way he does in a novel like Tess, and how Hardy himself is being implicated of being complicit and of being a voyeur in the tragedy of Tess. By necessity, then, Hardy himself is implicated in the very immorality he has watched and deplored. He cannot escape his fellowship. The grief that overwhelms the end of the Tess of the D'Urbervilles is the expression of his guilt, futility, and loss. And again, this is a kind of alternation of the negative comment on Hardy as a misogynist, as somebody who is complicit in the fate of his woman characters, and this moving of the wheel of criticism, as we say, towards Hardy being a sympathetic and even as a man with a lot of empathy. A subtle reason that may lie behind this identification of with women, as critics like Seymour Smith suggest in his biography, Hardy was throughout his life resentful when he felt that his intellectual background was brought into question. This was undoubtedly a consequence of his extreme sensitivity, but was also indicative of the great difficulties then faced by any writer who lacked a university background. something that something that is crystallized in the character of Jude in Jude the Obscure, who tries to be a self-taught learner attempting to enter the University of Christminster, Oxford. Since all women were subject to this lack, it may have well put him into even stronger sympathy with them. Almost all Hardy's women suffer, whether they are patient, devoted, and forgiving women like Tess and Elizabeth Jane, or willful, capricious, and fundamentally good-hearted women like Bathsheba, Everdeen, Thomasine, or the passion-tormented romantic enchantresses like Eustacia, Bai, and Vicetta. They are all extraordinary women. Being intensely emotional, they suffer. Single-mindedness, enterprise, and independence are qualities which all of them share, and because they are exceptional, they are not at home with the world in which they are pitchforked. Their romantic temperament urges them to break the dull routine of daily life and strive for something new. Their love may make them selfless or selfish, forgiving or resentful. They may submit to or they may struggle against their destiny. Having placed Hardy in this spectrum, where he has been regarded as forerunner to the feminist tradition, with his immense empathy and loving kindness in the portrayal of his fictional women, what were his views on women's suffrage, which had crystallized to meaningfulness towards the end of the century? Because this entire century is based on the crystallization of this one important idea of the woman's question, the role of women, and especially towards the end of the century, you have the political battles for the woman's vote. So Hardy, who was so sympathetic and so invested in the cause of women, what was his take on this idea of women's suffrage? And I will turn to this criticism of Hardy from his first wife. Having placed Hardy in this spectrum whereby he is regarded as forerunner to the feminist tradition with his immense empathy and loving kindness in the portrayal of his fictional women, what were his views on women's suffrage which had crystallized to meaningfulness towards the end of the century? His interest in the suffrage cause is nil in spite of Tess, wrote the first Mrs. Thomas Hardy in 1894, and his opinions on the woman question not in her favor. He understands only the women he invents, the others not at all. Very, very bitter comment on her husband as a writer, as a man. But then we have to take it with a pinch of salt, because 1894, 20 years of marriage, very embittered relations between the two of them. But then again, in every embittered comment, there is some degree of truth. So with that, we have to take this comment. And it must be stated that Hardy steered clear of political involvement and feminist activism and had no overt feminist agenda. After the publication of Tess of the D'Urbervilles in 1891, he was asked to become the vice president of the Women's Progressive Society, an invitation he politely declined. While he respected women, he held no aspirations to promote their political agenda. This was a source of discontent for his wife, who remained active in the suffragist movement until the end of her life. However, he had great admiration for strong women and disgust for a society which suppressed their ambition and individuality, as it had perhaps done in the case of his mother. Regardless of his personal opinions regarding activism, society, and women, the work of Hardy was used in support of the women's rights movement. Feminists of the era used his literary works to influence opinion regarding marriage laws, divorce proceedings, suffrage, and equality in education and career opportunities. For Hardy, marriage or motherhood was never the chief role destined for women. He depicted the struggle of women to attain selfhood and agency even when they were bogged down by social expectations and patriarchal restrictions, with sympathy and artistic integrity. His reticence about supporting women's activism suggests that he was torn between his desire to portray women as capable and intelligent while holding on to his own essentialist or ambivalent ideas, we could say. There is, in fact, an ambivalence in Hardy's attitude towards the victimization and resistance of women. We are left without any philosophy or ideology to which we may firmly pin him down. Hardy often claimed that he was only a recorder of impressions who wrote as his mood dictated, and as life bombarded him with impressions, he merely recorded them as filtered through his own sensibilities. Hardy conceived of and depicted his female characters as less than perfect women, and endearing all the more because of that. If he suffused them in the glow of his loving kindness, the most erroneous of them, I think there is not another woman apart from Arabella in Jude the Obscure, who has forfeited Hardy's sympathy at any point. It was because he believed that in 19th century English society, women were disadvantaged irrespective of their social standing, and they deserved understanding and empathy rather than moral indictment. As I try to conclude, our estimation and survey, and we have surveyed several schools of critics and critical opinion. It is important to keep Peter Widowson's judicious warning in mind while we try to review and re-evaluate Hardy's attitude towards women from critically rereading his life and work, if we are to avoid uncritically labeling him as a feminist. And what are the words of Widowson? I quote, "There may be every possibility for a modern critic to strategically reproduce a feminist Hardy, but it would be historically suspect, if nothing else, to hypothesize a male author in the second half of the 19th century as having a conscious and coherent feminist philosophy in view." Close quotes. I thus choose to end my talk by leaving you with disparate impressions of Hardy the man and the artist, and with the extremities of the critics' estimations over the decades. But there is one thing which can be claimed unequivocally, is the out-of-the-box views about women with respect to morality, love, marriage and motherhood that greets the modern reader of Hardy, a writer who, after all, sought to challenge the set molds into which Victorian womanhood was expected to freeze. May we all learn to appreciate his writing, keeping all these contexts in mind, and not try to superimpose our modern sensibilities onto a man and his artistry, who was, after all, a 19th century Victorian. Thank you. Okay, before I end up, I will just go to this last slide where I've actually put up a few suggested reading. It might help the undergraduates and the postgraduate students. There are many more, but I've tried to choose a few about which I have talked and few I have not been able to mention in my survey of the critics of Hardy's writing. So we could have a look at some of these works if you want to think of Hardy and the ideas of feminism.
Yes, sure.
Thank you, ma'am, for facilitating such a positive learning environment by your wonderful lecture. Now, may I request Dr. Narugopal Mukherjee, sir, Reader, Department of English, Bankura Christian College, to conduct the interactive session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madhurima, for giving me this privilege. And you also, Dr. Indrila Ghosh, for such a wonderful and exhaustive deliberation. We know that you are an authority on Thomas Hardy. That is what also was voiced by Oyun in the very beginning. And we that despite the technical glitches, the problems that we had. In fact, in both the sessions, we had problems. This is a day on which we had a series of technical issues, which in spite of that, we are really thankful to the audience for their patient hearing. They have been here all along, despite the problems a number of times in both the sessions. Anyways, now the platform is open for all kinds of questions, comments, and observations on Thomas Hardy. You can unmute yourselves and ask the questions directly, or you can put your questions in the chat box. So, anybody there? Please unmute yourselves. This is from Orijit Sarkar. Thank you, ma'am, for continuing through all the technical disruptions. The ideas of Hardy regarding women at various junctures are relevant even today, how far can this hold true? Okay, now over to Dr. Ghosh. Yes, Indrila? Indrila, are you there?
Did she get disconnected by any chance? Again? Indrila, are you there? Oh my God. Sir, should I ask her to rejoin then?
Yeah, please ask her.
Sir, she is rejoining. She
Okay.
asked us to wait for a minute.
Okay. Indrila, you are back now. Do you
Yes,
hear me now?
a bad day of Hardy's missed chances. That is what is happening. So sorry. Yes, Narugopal, I can hear you now.
Yeah. It is a question from Orijit Sarkar.
Okay.
First of all, he has congratulated you for your continuing through the session in spite of the technical disruptions.
Thank
And
you.
thereafter, his question is: the ideas of Hardy regarding women at various junctures are relevant even today. How far can this hold true? The ideas of Hardy regarding women at various junctures are
Yes.
relevant even today. How far can this hold true?
Yes, certainly, because as I said, that Hardy was trying to project ideas about womanhood, about marriage, about the ideas about the new woman, which were very much in advance of his times. It was not very well accepted during his time. If you look at the way that the reception of chess initially, the critics debate over chess, the circumstances leading to the publication and then the banning of Jude, the characters of Sue and the relationships between Sue and Jude. All these are pointers to the fact that what Hardy was writing and he firmly believed were ideas which could be taken for granted, ideas which would be more comfortable in 50 or 100 years' time, the things that were not very easy for his audiences, his readers, or his critics to admit at that time. So, again, of course, the things that he was talking about, the ideas that motherhood is not the be all and the end all of a woman's identity, are things that we have seen the waves of feminism fight for and achieve. So, of course, it holds true and holds relevant for the 21st century and is going to hold importance because not every section of society, even our Indian society, has seen the taking for granted of these ideas of womanhood. which in the West, to some extent, has become more easily, accepted. I don't know if the question is answered, but this is my take on the question.
Okay, thank you so much, Indrita, and thank you, Orijit Sarkar, also for putting the question. Now, any other question that is there? Any question on YouTube platform? Let me check. It's not there. Okay, it's now.
Sir, should I ask a question?
Oh, sure, please.
Indriladi, do you really think, I mean, what is your personal take on the view that Hardy was a misogynist? If you can exemplify.
My personal take. Again, if I just have to talk about my personal take, I would believe, from my understanding of Hardy, both his life and his mainly his creative vision, I never felt that Hardy was a misogynist. But then again, reading his biography, reading his attitude towards especially his two wives, sometimes gives you the idea that he was not completely free from the Victorian ideas of what is expected of a wife and what could be expected of somebody who was not a wife. So again, there his in this I would best describe Hardy's attitude to women as sometimes confused, sometimes ambivalent, but are definitely not a misogynist. Hardy was definitely not a misogynist. So whenever I tried to show through the juxtaposition of the criticism that Elaine Showalter is directing at the Mayor of Casterbridge, the way that the character of Henchard has been read by her, and other critics who are reading Henchard at face value as a misogynist. So again, whenever Hardy is being accused of being directly a misogynist, I think there is scope for rereading Hardy in a more complete and whole way, not just reading one particular story or one particular character. That would be it would be a little unfair or unjust to read into Henchard and think of Hardy as misogynist, perhaps. So I don't know if it's answered.
Thank you, Ayon, and thank you, Indrita,
Beautifully answered.
for the response.
I see a few questions popping up.
Yeah.
There is another question by Pooja, sir.
Pooja Banerjee, right. Thank you for the beautiful lecture, ma'am. I would request you to kindly elaborate if the concept of new woman can be applied to Hardy's women characters sometimes.
Not really sometimes, actually, Pooja, most of the times. Because if you, I do not know if you have started reading any bit of Hardy's novels, which I hope you will be doing soon. If you read a novel like, even an early novel like Far from the Madding Crowd, 1874, you have the character of Bathsheba Everdeen, the woman who is managing her own farm and doing quite well. She's industrious and she's enterprising, and it is only because of Victorian realism where she's subsumed into, finally also into this idea of marriage. But I think it's quite an unnecessary ending. Hardy makes us feel perhaps that the ending could have been different in any other time, which would have given opportunities for women to retain their independence the way that Bathsheba does. And also coming back to the later novels like Tess, and especially the character of Sue Bridehead in Jude the Obscure, where she is modeled as the new woman. The kind of thoughts that she has, especially the kind of relationship she maintains with the three men in her life, where initially, if you read the novel, there is a relationship with a university scholar with whom she maintains almost a platonic kind of relationship. So again, this idea of women not always being reduced to their sexuality, not always reduced to their physiological or biological role, is something that Hardy constantly tries to depict by the construction of intelligent women, who are women who think, who are philosophers, and not just and these thoughts are not just it is not just the realm of men, but women are also allowed to venture into the into the realm of intellect, which you could say. So again, this idea of the new woman is again and again coming back in the works of Hardy. Also, if you read some of his short stories, I think you for yourself will try to, you for yourself are going to feel the kind of advanced views about women's emancipation and empowerment that Hardy had. And
thank you, Indrila, and thank you, Pooja, also. The next question is from Sonia Chatterjee, one of our students. Ma'am, in Hardy's novel, there is a dominating role of fate. Can you say something on it, please? This is a stock question, we know.
So fate is the all overpowering and dominating force in Hardy's novels, because if you remember, and if you ask me rather, if you want me to answer it in a different way, why do you think the role of fate is so important and the occurrence of chance and coincidence are important? You have to understand that Hardy, a later Victorian novelist, has read much of Darwin. By the time he is writing his novels, he has read Darwin and the evolutionary debates which are happening in Victorian England 1850s onwards. So this idea of the randomness of the universe, the idea of everything not being harmonious, that there is no Christian God who is going to reward you for your actions, good actions, and is going to punish you if you do something wrong. This entire comfort has been taken away from Victorian society. So the intellectual Victorians are absolutely in a kind of, are being bombarded with this constant sort of uncertainty where fate predominates. What happens to you and what you meet, your actions are not in keeping with your deservings. So I think in that way, the role of fate can be looked at. So again, it is a very challenging question to answer in one or two sentences, because fate plays the most important role in Hardy's novels. It is fate which dominates what the actual destiny of characters or the outcome of their actions will be. It is not always in keeping with with what the person deserves. I hope it is partly answered, Sonia.
Yeah, I hope. Sonia, are you there? Are you happy with the response from her? I think she has kept in mind that.
No, she has thanked ma'am profusely.
Yeah, from Face of the D'Urbervilles, as yeah, maybe she has that in mind. Quoting from Shakespeare, as Hardy says, "As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods." Anyway, Sonia, I hope you are satisfied with the response that you have got from ma'am. Now, is there any other question from any of the participants here? Okay, then let me hand over the platform to Madhurima now. Madhurima? Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
You are. You are audible, Madhurima.
Thank you. May I now request to my senior, Bipasha De, undergraduate honors, 6th semester, Department of English, Bankura Christian College, to officially conduct the vote of thanks. Over to you, Bipasha De.
Thank you, Madhurima. I feel privileged enough to propose on behalf of the Department of English, Bankura Christian College, our indebtedness to the two distinguished resource persons, Professor Amrit Sansar and Dr. Vendana Ghosh ma'am, who have been kindly enough to spare their valuable time for today's lecture. On behalf of all the participants, I acknowledge with sincere gratitude and thankfulness some new perspectives in studies and further researches that they have opened up for us through their engaging deliberations. Thank you again, Professor Amrit Sansar and Dr. Vendana Ghosh ma'am. I humbly acknowledge the participation of the huge number of faculty members, research scholars, students from different institutions over Google Meet forum or over YouTube. They have been patient enough to listen to the lectures with rapt attention and inquisitive enough to interact with our reverend resource persons. Thank you all.
Lastly, I would like to thank again one and all involved in different ways in hosting the seminar, in being our respected teachers, students, and the office staff who have been benign enough to extend all kinds of cooperation to make this lecture series reach its target. We will meet again tomorrow at 11 a.m. with two eminent speakers, Dr. Shubhajit Sengupta Sir, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English and Culture Studies, the University of Bardwan, and Professor Sondip Ayun Sir, Professor and Head, Department of English and Culture Studies, Bankura University. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vipasha. Thank you all. So with this, thank you, Indiladi.
Thanks to all of you.
It has been a wonderful experience for all of us. Thanks for being there.
Same here. Okay, best wishes to everyone, especially students, and to the department also. Continue doing such good work.
Thank you. Thank you